Unless you want to hear yourselves as background noise, that'd be fine. You can hand it to me like that if you want. That's fine. All right. So when we were here last time, I had a chance to introduce all those. Today we'll get into it. And I always do the hardest part first, which is the skull. So that's really what we'll do, the skull, and see how fast we can go. We can continue on past that. Today, my guess is we have at least two. What's today? We'll probably be some. So the next Monday is what? That is the 4th? Is that correct? And the next Wednesday, rather. 4th, 11th. The 18th would be the 18th and the 25th. And I'll know better next week. So one of those things. So that's really the next major thing. And basically, what the practical is, you'll get one of these. You'll get that effectively is your word bank. You'll get an answer sheet, and I'll have a bone like this. And it'll be identify the bone, and I'll probably have markers on a couple of features. You'll have to identify the features. That's what you're looking forward to in a few weeks. And we'll have some time in the lab, it's open lab time. And I'm in here other days, so depending on your schedule, I may be able to pull some bones out. On Monday, I have an advanced anatomy lab, so I can pull the bones out and find places to open. So that's the backstory for today. So, we're going to look at the skull first. And really, part of that handout. Okay, the skull, and this is the way you study bones. You study bones by compartmentalizing. So the skull has 22 bones. Cranial bone, and by definition, a cranial bone is in contact with your brain. With the coverings of your brain, which you will learn soon, are called meninges. Yeah, grab one of those if you want. Knock yourself out. So, here are. You guys be organized, I'll be organized. I printed 20 of those. I don't even know.
Wait, how many bones did you say? Go ahead.
Pardon me?
How many? 22.
All right, hold on. Right on. T, temporal. All right. So, in the skull, in the cranial portion, you have two bones that are paired, right and left, parietal and temporal, and four bones that are not, so the end of it totally. Frontal, occipital, sphenoid, and ethmoid are single bones. You see the stuff that I've written there. Facial bones, 14. As you might guess, they comprise your face. So we're looking at bones that make up your jaw, let's say, or at least count some of the bony portions. So a total of 14, 6 of whom are paired. And the 6 that are paired are no specific order, zygomatic, which is really your cheek bones over here. Lacrimal, which is that little bump on the inside of your eye. These are all paired, where the tear duct is located. Something called the turbinates, which is really not that, I would even consider a separate bone for the sake of completeness. The maxillary bone, which are your upper jaw, for 2. Nasal, and that's the bridge of your nose. Most of your nose is made out of cartilage. There's 2 there. We're getting there. Palatine. It's really the hard part of your palate, but the smallest portion. Most of it's maxillary. You see that in a bit with some of the models that I have. And then the 2 that are single, vomer, which is sort of the bony part of the nasal septum down here, the lower part of your nose. And interestingly enough, the most unique bone of all of these, because the only one that moves is the mandible. So that's your lower jaw, and that's the mandible. Which, believe me, somewhere, why we consider it one is kind of odd. But they consider it basically when a baby's born, this bone and this bone is already fused together. So even though surely it's identical soft, it's considered as one bone with that bird. It's this portion. That's really, I mean, it sort of isn't, but it is. So if you count those up, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 11, 13, 14, wow. So what's interesting about them are these. Here, I'll put a star next to them. And I'm putting a star next to them because they participate, and there are 7 bones altogether that make up the order. So 3 of them are skull, are cranial bones rather, and the others are facial bones. So you do need to remember those because I will already tell you a test book. You're going to have to name like 3 bones of the organ out of the 7. That'll be on that practical exam. I'm giving you a book. Don't you thank me, money's always good. Get one of those little square things you can put on your phone. I could do that. My kid used to have one of those, and he did high-level tuning of vehicles. Go figure. All right, so here we are. So let me continue on with the saga here. Okie dokie. So I don't know what you doing in lecture. I always ask this. What are you guys into in lecture? Scan.
Yeah, the academic.
Okay, so we did a little bit of that here too. Okay, that's good.
We talk about like what they look like.
Okay, cool. Very good. All right, all sorts of. So hopefully you're all having we're trying to get the information across. So this is, and bones are something it's part of every professor has a comfort zone. Bones, joints are comfort zone for me. Very much so. So hopefully this will work and the system won't shut down. But you may have seen some of this before. So even though this is all part of the system, we're going to talk about bone. Almost all of your bones come directly are made out of cartilage originally and become bone. So all the bones in your extremities started off as cartilage. The only ones that really didn't are the bones in your skull and your clavicles. There's something called intramembranous bone. They're a little bit different. And so we'll look at this. When we look at the joint aspect, we'll look more closely at cartilage and at ligaments. And ligament is a commonly used term. The most common usage of the term is how bones are held together. They are held together with ligaments. So it's a fair amount of your body mass. Your muscles are by far and away the most. And there are 2 skeleton aspects. Axial core, so that's the head, neck, spine, chest apparatus. That's basically all of those are the axial bones. And you're going to see that repeats itself when we start talking about muscles. We talk about axial or core muscles. We talk about, and then the other are appendicular, having to do with the appendages, arms and legs. And by definition in bones, that's the connector. So your shoulder assembly and hip assembly, which we're not going to do today, we will do next week, are by definition part of, you can make an argument they're part of the core, but in proper anatomy, we don't do that. So skull, the vertebral column, we'll probably get a little bit of that in today, and the thoracic cage, which there isn't a whole lot about, and the sternum, which would be considered part of that as well, are all part of the axial skeleton, long axis, support the head and neck. Biggest job I think they do is protect the brain, the spinal cord, and the thoracic organs, which are basically your heart and your lungs. So it's not extraordinarily important. And so color-wise, they're showing you the greenish ones are your axial skeleton and everything else. As you can see, the shoulder and the hip assembly is appendicular. Same deal on the back. So you can see it a little more closely. You can see the assembled vertebral column. I am told we have a new skeleton that they're going to have to put together. So hopefully they'll have that done in the next couple of weeks. You'll be able to see it. Because all these other ones are, and I've been teaching this class here for 15 years. You get to play with them. We have real ones and plastic ones. Europe, no, it's plastic. I'll show you the difference when we get into it. Yeah, play with them. You're going to have to hold them. I'm going to have them out on a table, a bone. So it may be plastic. Plastic is useful because it really reflects everything. Real bones are interesting, but they deteriorate. And what happened when we formed this biology department or science department, maybe 20 years ago or so, here a little bit more than that, Dr. Dress, who some of you are going to have for micro and micro lab, he was our department chair. He told me that another college was replacing, or university replacing all their bones, and they were selling them, like on eBay or something like that. We just bought a bunch. So a lot of these are pretty well beat up. They're very expensive to replace. I'll tell you that now. So yeah, it's all touch. This is the best part because it's hands-on with regard to the bones. Muscles, we have models. Yes, we'll do a dissection of the brain. So you'll be able to, it's a sheep brain, so it's not nearly as big as ours, but it's interesting. But this is pretty good stuff. So the skull is why I do it first. It's the hardest one. Let's get it the heck out of the way. Extremity bones, particularly in the lower extremity, legs and thigh, and the bones are bigger, so they're pretty easy to identify, as are the landmarks on the bones are easy. So cranial, close the brain, simple definition, attachment for head and neck muscles. And really what a lot of your, particularly the musculature in the back of your neck and in your back, its big job is to hold up your head. Okay. Facial bones, framework of your face. Yes, openings for special senses, air and food passage, teeth, muscles of facial expression. Interestingly, the muscles come from those bones and go into this soft tissue under the skin and allow us to smile or blink or move, all those kinds of things that we do. Purse your lips, whistle, all those interesting. And we communicate so much with our face. Very much do. I look at that all the time. That's why I'd rather talk to you this way than online, because I can see you. And I can see whether I'm holding your interest or you're bored stiff. Because I know my wife doesn't want to listen to me anyway. She was in a very swearingly bad mood. On Sunday night, near the end of the Steelers game, when I was stressed, she's at her mom. They had a major water line break. That's in McCandless Township by North Hills Pacific Hospital. And ba-boom, all of a sudden there's 6 inches of water, mud, sludge, and sewage sitting in the basement. So she's not very happy with the water people and had a few very direct comments to make about them to me today that I would not repeat because they're not anything I should repeat. Yes, that kind of language. So facial bones, all of the above, and we'll look at the skull bones, and it's really the first thing you're going to see is going to be joints in the skull, and they're called sutures. And you are holding them there, and if you would, let me feel that for a minute. Here's a skull model, and somebody colored them in, which is fine, it's easier to see. They're in blue here or red here, and not so much colored in here, but you can put a line like that. They are called sutures. In the old days, before we knew about cosmetically putting stitches in, they would just, somebody curled their skin back in ancient Rome with gladiators. That's where a lot of the early surgical techniques we didn't know. That's when the first hypodermic needle came from. They would just sew them back together randomly and add a swatch. And they still use the term suture. And that's what these are called. You'll see that. So, frontal bone is the bone that makes up the forehead. The top of your skull is the parietal bones. There's 2, one on each side. And the occipital bone, you see a little bit of that yellowish here. It's back here. And what these define, I'll show you what we have. A rubberized model is a big hole called the foramen. And for a foramen, from last time, it's really more or less an opening. And because this is by far and away the largest skull, because the brainstem is in here and it becomes your spinal fluid, so you can get through. So all of that's part of it. And so these are called sutures. There's one that you don't see very well, and this is a different one that goes on that it's kind of like a yellowish, and I'll show it to you. Kind of would be like here. It's another suture that's got a name in and of itself. And we get into all of those. What's interesting about all of these sutures, okay, is you can see where I have that L that's on there, I guess, and there's some here on the left side, right? And all of the sutures, whether this one, or the one back here, all somehow connect to the parietal bone. All sutures are, at least there's another bone, the parietal bone. And it's interesting, in babies, those sutures, it's a joint. It's a fibrous joint, and when you're born, the joint is still mostly fibrous, so it allows the skull to shift, which many times is necessary to facilitate vaginal delivery. And a lot of you moms, you dads, see a baby and the head looks distorted and say, oh my God. And the reality is that it goes back, where it's a subtle distortion. There's that happens, and my first wife, this little Lamazi show for a long time, and we was always trying to explain that. So another name we give to those when they're movable is soft spots. But the fancy name is called fontanelle. So because there's fluid underneath it, sometimes they sort of pouch out. And it happens to look like little fountains. So hence fontanelle, ELLD is diminutive suffix. Spaghetti, rigatoni, rigatini. Say tomato and I see. Let's call the whole thing up. Actually, that would be more tomato and tomatillo. And the funny is the tomatillo. No, a tomatillo is a different vegetable. It's a fruit. Tomatoes are a fruit. Tomatillos are like in the gooseberry family. Did you ever have a salsa verde at a Mexican restaurant? They make it from jalapenos and tomatillos. And they boil them, and then you buzz them. You get the boat motor out. Boat motor, immersion blender. You buzz them. It's okay. Chilaquiles are very, very good if you go out, like to try them in San Diego. Very good, very good. Good places to eat. Love that. Nevertheless, so there's sutures, serrated sawtooth. Here they are. So understand when we talk about the parietal bone, there's not a lot to say about it. These are the sutures. This one, remember we talked about body planes, first lab. Frontal, because it's in the front. Sagittal, because it's this way. Okay? So you have the frontal or coronal plane. Remember the plane that went through you this way. Sagittal plane divides you into right and left. So that's the sagittal suture. This is the frontal suture. And then back here, and I'll show it to you, it's the occipital bone meets that sagittal suture. So it kind of looks like the sagittal suture is coming this way and the occipital bone going this way. And what it reminded anatomists of, the Greek letter lamb. So it's like an upside down Y. If you see it like on a fraternity or sorority. And so they call it the Biol suture. And the one over here is called squamous. And remember, squamous, when we think of them like flattened cells that you're learning about now in lecture, squamous actually, to a certain extent, the original derivation was from shingle. So rather than these being quite sawtooth, there's a little bit more like an overlap, like shingles on your roof. It's interestingly. So you just have to remember the names, not where they derive from. So coronal or frontal, both are fair. Sagittal, lamboidal, squamous, whatever you want to pronounce it. Okay. So here are all those bones, and here are the facial bones. So facial bones, cranium is divided, and I'll show you the vaults. So when you talk about the calvarium, it's like in here. Took the lid off, we have, this is what happens to the bone when some presses on it. I was telling you about it last time, there's something called Wolff's Law. Bone forms the pressure drive, so frontal lobes are here, temporal lobes of the brain are here, the occipital lobe, something called the cerebellum, are back here. And effectively, they have created these cavities. And you can see a number of holes, and the holes are typically where nerves, motion, and some blood vessels. So that's when you're talking about the cranial wall, called the calvaria, superior, lateral, posterior portions. So they're fossa by definition, those sort of cavity-like depressions that are there, anterior, middle, and posterior. So you can see that. Here we go. Anterior, middle, and posterior. And so you're going to take a look at these holes. And the first little nugget is not every hole is real. When those bones that you were asking about before, when they prepare a bone, whether it's a real one, and then the plastic ones are made. So the real ones you can see here are some holes. So in order for them, basically what they do in this hole, to donate and use it effectively, because when you boil it long term, all the connective tissue kind of now. And like a slow cooker. I don't know, that's that funny. I love slow cookers. Very different. That. Nevertheless, some of those holes that show up are filled with cartilage. There's nothing that goes through them, and anatomists didn't really know that, so they gave them a name. So one of them is very famous is here. This is called the foramen lacerum. Lacerum, gash, laceration. Still with cartilage. There's nothing goes through it. The cartilage disappears when they prepare the bones. These foramina, as the plural, that's called, I'll go over these again, it's called rotundum, which is round, oval, because it's oval, and this one's, they're making it larger than it should be, it's called spinos, it's like a little spine, more thin. Those are important to know. Major structures go through that, and the way we build this together, down the road, you're going to see guys are passageways for what are called cranial nerves. So, a branch of the trigeminal nerve goes through that, another branch goes through here, and this one doesn't have a nerve, it's a blood vessel. That blood vessel kind of goes up this way, it's called the middle meningeal artery. You'll get to that probably next term, AQ2. And so when someone's struck on the side of the head, either in a fight, with an object, or in a car accident, you really worry about bleeding. That artery goes. So that's one of the things to look for when you're going to have something called the hematoma, a pocket of blood that's pressing and damaging the brain. So there's a lot. Thank you very much. There's a lot of that goes on. So here's the skull, frontal lobe, temporal lobe. That's making the big part of that posterior fossa. That's called the cerebellum. We'll get to that in anatomy. You're going to see that when we dissect the brain. And that has these ridges kind of going in a different direction. The ridges are very famous. You're going to learn about that also. They're called sulci and gyri. Sulci are indentations. Gyri are sort of outpouchings that are there. And then the openings and lots of names, and we'll get to quite a few of them. So this gives you an idea of the cavities that are there and the location of some of the bones. So here's what I wrote out for you, and we'll start here. Okay. The frontal bone is basically your forehead. Okay. There's not a lot to say about it. There is, to me, minimal anatomy. The single most important part, okay, they call this the supra, which means above, orbital margin. Margins are sometimes ridges, tissue. It's that sort of like where your eyebrows. You can feel that margin of the bone. Other than that, there's not a lot of anatomy. What it does with regard to the orbit, which is this opening for your eye, we always hear about orbital fractures. There's no orbital bone. Orbital fracture, you have to identify the bone. So the bones that are here in the upper, sort of the upper superior margin of the orbit, that's part of the frontal bone. And I don't have one that's separate that extends here into the organs. That's really what I have to say about that. There's not like it's a very big bone, it's a heavy bone, comparatively speaking, and there's not a lot of additional anatomy. And the parietal bones that make up those sutures, there's really no relevant anatomy other than participates in both the names. The first one of these that has some significant anatomy is this guy. That's the occipital bone, and though it's not an exact fit, it'll work a lot. The occipital bone, that big opening, the spinal cord, brainstem, and then comes the spinal cord and passes through here somewhat anterior, and it sits on top of it. Okay? And so I'll show you the plastic version of this. I don't have the bony version, here it is. So if I were to take this, and it's roughly the same, not exactly, of course, and it sort of sits kind of like that. So it's that ridged area that you can feel in the back of your head extending anteriorly or a little forward to create this somewhat of an extension. You'll see some of the structure that are associated. So on the back it has ridges, and the back area of your neck, or this portion of your body is called the nuchal, N-U-C-H-A-L area. And so these are like supra or above the nuchal line or supranuchal ridges. Not a big deal for us. The big player is here, foramen magnum. Whenever you hear the name magnum, we use a lot in anatomy. Okay? Magnum means really large. You're going to see there's a big muscle in your thigh, which is really one of the groin muscles called the adductor magnus. Okay, we'll get to that would be the muscle part of the throat. So that's there. These rounded areas here, you can see a little bit of marker on there, are called occipital condyles. You'll see in bone, we name them either for the bone they're on or the bone they're going to. In this case, these occipital condyles, they're on the occipital bone. They sit on this bone. This is the first cervical vertebrae that's sitting kind of like up here. Okay, it's big. You can see it's got a very famous name. It's called first cervical vertebrae, it's also known as the axis. Okay, and it's called the axis. Okay, I beg your pardon, it's called the atlas. I beg your pardon. Because the other one below is called the axis. That's why I got confused. The atlas is mythologically was the mythological character that held up the floor. Remember all that from mythology? Perseus, Minotaurs. Hey. So it kind of sits, give you an idea, kind of this way. And so it's responsible, those condyles are responsible for you, like moving your head up and down if you were nodding to someone. Okay, and you can see they're continuous with the opening that is the transition between your brainstem and the spinal cord. But we're not done yet. On either side, maybe you can see them in this heart with the light. You can see a little opening there. That's not artificial. That's real. And I go to no expense, literally no expense, to demonstrate these things to you. So you have an opening here and an opening here on the other side. You look good, don't you? You look fair. The one looks good. A hole. Well, if there was a hole that was impenetrable, I would put it in there, but it's still there. So you're going to have to imagine the other one goes this way. Okay? And there is a nerve that goes through here. It isn't quite angled so acutely. It isn't angled so far off to the side. It's a little bit straighter like that. So this little opening on either side is called the hypoglossal canal. Glossal means tongue. Hypo means under. Hypodermic, under the skin. And the hypoglossal nerves, which you'll come to learn, the 12th cranial nerve, they're the ones that are responsible for you sticking out your tongue. Okay? One of the things we test when we have somebody stick out their tongue, not only are we looking at the tongue to see if there's any damage or And it's a very good mirror of infectious disease, tongues that are coated, where you see spots on the tongue with measles, things like that. Okay. You also basically are testing to see if that nerve that comes out that way is intact, where there's been a gap. Sometimes the tongue to stick out your tongue, and for those of you going into nursing, when you do this, and this is going to be part when you do, not next term, but the first term of your second year, you do physical assessment, right? That's one of the things you do, it's called surveying the cranial nerves. That's why I go over. You say stick out your tongue. Well, if somebody says you stick out your tongue, instinctively, it goes out straight. If someone sticks out their tongue and it goes the wrong way, one side or the other, basically say, hey, just stick out your tongue straight. They go, I am. It's going sideways. That tells you there is a problem with one. That's not a great sign. It's usually means you're damaging the brainstem. That's not good. Little heads up. All those things. So, that was the frontal bone. And like I said, the frontal bone, even though I didn't change the slide, not a lot to talk about. I'm not worried about for now the sinuses or the foramen. There's a little bumpy that's over here. You can feel it on the medial portion of your eyebrow. I always joke about my daughter's first boyfriend, unibrow, just one, Cro-Magnon. And pleasantly enough, he's not in jail as we speak. It's okay. He's not a terrible person. Not a terrible person. So I'll go through we'll see a lot of these slides again. The parietal bones, sides of the cranium, most of it here, all the sutures. Same illustration. Here is that occipital, but this is that lambdoidal suture. What you see, we all have these. We don't really count them. They're called sutural bones. They're little pieces of bone that make up the sutures. So sometimes they look like little bone fragments. There's nothing unusual about that. A lot of us have little bits of extra bone, interestingly enough. And a lot of times it's not anything that indicates any degree of disease or problem. Here's the occipital bone. You can see the line and the ridges. The bump that you feel back here is called the external, outside, occipital, that bone. Protuberance, something sticks out. And here are the condyles that are there. So you can see it again, and I use the same illustrations kind of over and over. Most of the back of the skull articulates with the parietal, temporal, and sphenoid bones. We get to the sphenoid bone. The interesting thing about the skull, usually that's something that's like a test question, is that all the bones, all the cranial bones contact the sphenoid bone. So we call that a cornerstone bone. And in the facial bones, all the facial bones contact in some way, shape, or form, okay, the maxillary bones. Those are the cornerstone bones when they basically are associated with others. Foramen magnum, occipital condyles, hypoglossal canal. These guys, not that important. Same illustration. Underneath, a couple extra holes to tell you about. So you can see it colored here. When you look at it, and I'll use this one that's got all the money. These are muscle attachments. When you look under here, okay, the area that I'm looking at is here. And it's sort of at the meeting, and brown is the occipital bone. And this sort of yellowish color is the temporal bone. Where they come together, there's a gash. That's known as a foramen. You can see it where I put this cotton tip applicator, okay, wooden Q-tip as it were, here, and on the other side here. And you can see the opening it's not round per se, it's more oval or flat. When we see openings like that, veins typically are in there. Veins in the body are wide and somewhat flatter than you think. Where arteries, and this is known for artery or more rounded. This is called the jugular foramen. So a very, very large blood vessel that carries blood back to the heart from your brain is the jugular vein. Most of the time, arteries and veins have the same name, but we don't have a jugular artery. The mate to that is a very famous carotid artery, and while it's next to it, has a different name. So we have a carotid artery bringing blood to your brain, and the jugular vein bringing blood back to the heart. There aren't a lot of places where you have different names. The heart, when you get to your next term, it's like that. They have very famous coronary arteries. They supply the heart, and the blood comes back to the heart by way of what are called cardiac veins. Those are about the only two examples. Right here, you take pulse, femoral artery, radial artery. Next to that are radial veins. So almost all of them have the same radial artery, radial vein, femoral artery, tibial artery, tibial vein, etc. Those are the oddballs. It's always good to remember oddballs, exceptions. In anatomy, where there's a lot of memorization, remember exceptions. You all guys learned about feedback, right? Positive and negative. Everything's negative feedback except for two major things: blood clotting and delivering a baby vaginally. It's not the only two, but those are the two. So you remember those two as positive feedback. What kind of feedback is glucose? What kind of feedback is calcium? Negative. Because you're all negative. Makes studying easy. That's what I'm about, trying to help them. All fair. Even those of us who are living in schools for all year. I grew up with something called a professional student. Okay, my happy place is student. I'm always in school. When I was in practice, I was more happy when I was in school teaching. So understand that that's what you have to share, I think, as a professor or as an instructor or whatever you are, as a mentor, how tricks and tricks to help. So that big long-winded thing, at the juncture point between these two bones, the occipital and the temporal bones, we're going to get to next, and the temporal's got a lot of anatomy. You have that jugular foramen, a lot of important stuff goes through it. The temporal bone is difficult. We used to have a temporal bone other than the model. And I have that, I'll be back there. We used to actually have a couple of little ones like our that was real. It kind of looks like this. It's one with the letter A. And for me, you don't have to know rights and lefts. I'll tell you which one's which, and you can figure out. So this is, and the most notable piece of anatomy is here, the opening for your ear. Okay, it's called the external, it's on the outside, auditory, okay, hiatus. Some people call it internal acoustic hiatus, it's down here. What covers that opening? Ear. So that's the boundary between your outer ear and the opening into the middle ear. You hear about middle ear infections that most of us had with kids. They maybe had tubes in ears when you were a kid, like yours. Okay. So here's the bone. There's a lot of anatomy that's on that bone. So let me get the picture and I'll show it to you. So this is the bone, temporal. Your temple area is here above your ear. So it's named for that area. There is a very important lobe of your brain that's mostly associated with hearing and balance. That's the temporal lobe. If you know somebody with seizure disorders, that some people call epilepsy, okay, and both of those terms are somewhat interchangeable. Temporal lobe is a very common area for that problem, by the way. So the temporal bones, one on each side, like the parietal bones, is paired. So we have different regions. You don't have to really know the regions as much as you need to know the structures. So I'm going to show it to you, and let me get the example that's there. So you can see, even they included the jugular foramen, even though it shares that with the occipital bone, the carotid canal is definitely in the temporal bone. Okay, and then we're going to look at the rest of these structures that are there. So here it is, that color. So I'll show it to you, and then I'm sure they'll have it individually. When we do the exam part, I either have bones or models, and very often, for instance, let me just show you with this one.
print this up. I'll just do it at home and put a color thing with it. Obviously without the names, but I'll have like arrows or lines pointing to structures for you to identify. So if this is a little harder to figure out, I'll have the diagrams, and I'll tell you, and I'll show you, I'll send you the numbers of the diagrams I typically use. So, you know, I'm trying to think of the right way to express it. I'd rather have, I don't want to surprise you. I've had a lot of wonderful colleagues. When they do those tests, it's like 30 seconds, tell me what bone it is, whether it's left or right, and then move to the next one. And this lady was wonderful. She does, maybe she's retired like I should be. She did a lot of anatomy and physiology in their nursing at Carlo. It's a really good school down there next to Pitt. Okay. So, but I just didn't agree with the philosophy. But all that aside, let me show you the important parts. So, the external acoustic meatus. There are three what are called processes that are major. Processes are just projections of bone. Behind your ear, behind that meatus, is the mastoid. The mastoid is like a channel that helps to amplify sound. So when you have a cold and sometimes it's hard to hear things, if it's filled with fluid, you can get a sinus infection there. So that mastoid process is like it's got filled with air and fluid. Normally, that's one area, that bump behind your ear. This is called the styloid process because it looks like a stylus, like an old writing implement with a point. They used to, scratch those out into like clay with things like that. And you can see it here. So here's the mastoid, it's got a little groove in it. Here's the styloid. This is a left. How do I know it's a left? Because I know the meatus, the external meatus pointing outward. The styloid process you can't feel, but there's a muscle. When you move your neck this way, this muscle is called the sterno because it comes from the sternum, clido because it comes from the clavicle, mastoid, it inserts in that mastoid process. It kind of surrounds and envelops that styloid process. So that sharp point of bone, you can't feel, it's covered in muscle. Okay. And then lastly, this is called the zygomatic process. So a lot of times we name bones, not either from where they are, like the occipital condyles, or where they're going. This is where they're going from. So here, mastoid, styloid. This is the zygomatic process because it's going to this bone, which is the zygomatic bone. This process, apart from the zygomatic bone, is usually called the temporal process. Together, they form this, as you can feel, this extension of your cheekbone. A lot of us call that our cheekbone. That's called the zygomatic arch. And that's really important because the muscles that help you chew, one called the temporalis, kind of goes through there and helps move your jaw up and down. The other one, called the masseter, attaches to that arch and then attaches to your lower jaw. See? Learn something new. Those are the big features. On the inside, you've got this. So a meatus is not just an opening, it's a tunnel. So external, and therefore this is internal. And then lastly, there's an interesting little opening. Let me get another one. So I don't have to get up. It's over here, between the mastoid and the styloid. There's a little foramina here, called the stylomastoid foramen. Okay? Little tiny opening. The muscle that innervates your face so you can smile, you can move your jaw, you can move your side, those types of things. All your facial expressions. It's called the facial nerve that goes through. So that's the stylomastoid foramen. They have it on here as well. So again, mastoid process, styloid process, and the openings right there. So the other thing that they have
is this sort of indentation very close to that styloid. Okay, and that's a small fossa. And that fossa is covered in cartilage. And that's where, I'll show you on one of these, to be able to teach you on video. Right there. So, when we get to this, this mandibular condyle, it inserts here, very, very close to that area. So here's stylomastoid frigum where my pinky is. And just ahead of it, you can see it's here. And that mandibular condyle and that fossa form a very important joint called the temporomandibular joint. The left one. That's the most easily dislocated joint in your body. That's the one that gives way. A lot of people, they open their mouth, go to the dentist, and you have trouble closing. So we have a lot of problems. And sometimes the problems with TMJ or temporomandibular joint dysfunction, will involve problems with that facial nerve. There's also a very, very famous disease that can come from a viral infection or trauma, or for no reason at all, or from a tumor. And you may have heard of this called Bell's palsy. It affects that nerve, the facial nerve, and people get a facial droop. Okay, one side of their face. And you've probably seen it. And if you haven't, you will. There's somebody you know will have it. Pardon me? Yeah, could be. There's a lot. We don't really know what it was. Be very. I've seen it after a virus. I've seen it for no reason at all. I've seen it. People had it post-COVID. Just for instance, there's a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it can be really something nasty. It's underneath it. My former brother-in-law got a real bad case, and it's probably stress related, when he was working as a 9/11 operator in Silver. So for about 15 years. And I mean, you're getting calls, kill themselves, something going on, and you're trying to be calm. The stress levels were immense. Unfortunately, what he did, thankfully not anymore, the whole gang would go over for drinks. You have to work a lot. And so he had an alcohol problem. And maybe that was very interesting. I saw him. Unfortunately, if you're here in Pittsburgh, they had a terrible series of murders at a synagogue in Squirrel Hill. The doctor who was killed, who was one of the other people killed, named Jerry Rabinowitz, was his family doctor, also graduated high school. We both came from North Jersey. Ended up here. So, every time I tell that about the Bell's palsy, I think about my former brother-in-law, and he's still around. I'm not married to his sister anymore. But I remember, I think about the time that one of the last times I saw Jerry for that terrible tragedy. So moving on. So that's that bone. Now, those are the easy ones. We've got two hard ones left. I know you don't believe it, but it's true. The next one, and I'm going to skip the sphenoid because this one in pink is the hardest. We're going to do this guy over here called the ethmoid. Okay, so we're going to skip the sphenoid with all the anatomy that's there. It's a monster. And we get the ethmoid. The ethmoid is, imagine if you could put your fingers way, way back, almost behind your eyeballs. That's about where the ethmoid is. And so that would be probably going upwards, and if you put them downward, you'd have the sphenoid. So those are like, if you ever get one of those sinus headaches behind your eyes, it's one of those two bones. And they all have sinuses as part of them. This is the deepest bone in the skull. And the only thing you really see of it in these models, you can really tell, and again, this is a real bone. Again, the difference is these get beat up, they get thin. Real bones, they typically have a yellowish color. Here you can see inside the bones, called the trabecular pattern. So it's like a honeycomb here. So the plastic bones retain structures, so we can study them. This one, there's a plate you can see in there, right in the middle, right between the two eyeballs. It's like a shelf of bone that points right up. see it here, this one is a real good one. It's bent a little bit, but that's, because these bones have been, I don't know, maybe 50 years old. I didn't bend it. That shelf is right there. So for those of you martial arts fans, when you hear about a martial arts movie, you kill somebody, pushing your nose up, that's the shelf of bone. That does it. Fancy name for that is the Krista Galley. So the bone kind of looks like this. I'll show you this is that shelf called the Krista Galley. Okay, because it was sort of cruciform shape. Okay, this is called a perpendicular plate. This is the upper portion of the bony nasal septum. You look inside any of these skulls, model or otherwise, into the nasal cavity, you have the nasal septum, the bony portion, this is all part of it. The upper portion is that perpendicular plate. This is, we'll get to it, that's the skull bone, the bone. This is the facial bone, that's the bone. So, and then on either side of it with this sort of cruciform or cross shape, okay, this is called the cribiform. And interestingly, in the cribiform plate, you have little perforations. What sits on top here, and you see it when we do the sheep brain, is part of the olfactory nerve that comes to smell. And so all the olfactory nerves, the actual nerves, kind of go down that way. So the anatomy is very significant. So Krista Galley, that forms because the coverings of your brain is an injury. Right? Attach and pull and touch it. That's why you kill somebody if you literally shove it in the brain. Cribiform plate is the resting place where it pulls the olfactory bulbs. That's like the switching station for your olfactory nerve smell. And then the perpendicular plate is the lower portion of the bony nasal septum. So you'll see it here, and there's other stuff. Okay, so I don't have one of these. We used to have it. I don't know where it's so small. And so the schematic I drew you, but these are called lateral masses. If you look on the right side of the board, it says turbinates. So these are these lateral masses and the turbinates, which sit a little bit lower inside the nasal cavity. Why we consider them a separate bone, I don't know, but they do. These give space, surface area for smell. I mean, conservatively, depending on who you read, we can smell about 1 million different smells. In the old days, it was always about 100,000. Now they think you can smell about 1 million different smells. But the more surface area of nose you have, the more you can smell. Okay. My dog is a poodle mix. Okay, he has a big nose, as poodles do. He's not self-conscious about it, and he doesn't want to have a nose job. No work for the job. But he's got that big poodle nose. Very useful for sticking in your pocket to grab something, which he does all the time. Take my dog. Please take my dog. So that's the ethmoid bone. So I only got the one more to do, so I always save the hardest for last, and here it is. Sphenoid. Sphenoid bone. Complex doesn't do it justice. Keystone and all the other cranial bones are in contact with it. Where did you go? Ah. So this is one we call it disarticulated, so it's just the bone itself. If you look at it here, this is these pieces that are sticking down here are already adherent with other bones. You can see the outline kind of like this way. So you really can't see it distinctively unless you have something like this, where you can sort of pull it apart and be able to discuss it. So this is that bone. So what are the highlight bones? This would be looking at the front. Imagine your eyeballs would be there. So the first thing you can see with the eyeballs, the openings that are here, here, and here, is you have a gash-like structure up here. That is called superior orbital fissures. It forms because we have two wings. These are called lesser wings because they're smaller. These are called greater wings, they're larger. Where they come together, there's an opening. You're going to find that's very important because these four different major nerves that help you move your eyes up, down, side to side all go through. Underneath it, this is another one of those oddball ones. Down here, it looks like there's another one of these gashes. And it is named the inferior orbital fissure, but like that one I showed you before, this random laser, nothing goes through it, it's a little cartilage. It just shows up when we get bones ready to look at it. So it's not, there's nothing to it, it's sort of an oddball thing. So we have lesser wings, greater wings, superior orbital fissure. On either side, if you go this way, I can do that. There's a hole. And if I go this way, same deal, there's going to be another hole. So what these two openings that crisscross are where the optic nerve comes from your eye, carrying it to your brain, eventually all the way back to the occipital lobes of the brain. So those openings are called the optic canal. And the difference is, the superior orbital fissure goes straight back, the optic canal goes crisscross. About 90% of your vision from your left eye goes this way, from your right eye that way. The other 10% kind of goes on the same side. We call stereoscopic vision. It gives us three-dimensionality. So if somebody has to wear a patch on their eye or lose time, they lose some of the ability to see their depth perception. My brother-in-law now lost an eye when he was in the Navy. So he has a glass on. I don't think he wears it. So it doesn't prevent you from working. He worked here at the Moon Water Treatment Facility, which was the township for like 40 years. Didn't stop him from having a few successful work. Good guy. And so this is what it looks like. Now notice where it crosses over. That area where it crosses over, there's a cavity. Right, see the cavity where it crosses over? The crossover is called the optic chiasm, where the optic crosses over. On top of that, what you can't see here, when you get next semester, you're going to see the major blood supply to the interior of your brain. It comes from a circle of arteries that come together. It's kind of like what they call a roundabout or a traffic circle. We can next to one with the front. We form it. The bane of the existence of the drive. Nevertheless, you have one of the major highways. You go to Philadelphia and you get one dirty. Like accidents every day. So that's called the circle of Willis. This is the optic chiasm. What it's sitting on top of, I'll take these out for you, is a cavity-like depression. Okay, and it looks like a little saddle. And indeed, they named it Turk's saddle. The formal name in Latin is Sella turcica, Turk's saddle. In that, anytime you see bone enclosing something important sits inside there, it's your master gland. So the pituitary gland, the optic chiasm, and the circle of Willis are all in this little area. It's almost like if you could punch a hole from where your hard palate ends, and the soft palate starts straight up, you'd be right there. So that's a really important structure. So we're not done, unfortunately. I put a little mark in there, you can see, black circle. So we're not done. Now down here, and again, these are encased in bone anyway. So here they are here. And here they are over here. You can see they're incorporated. Here's your hard palate. They're adherent to what these are called palatine bones. I'll show them to you separately. That's sort of the under area of the timber. And what they are not, because when anatomists saw them, they reminded them of a prehistoric flying creature, a bird or lizard. At that time, they not called them pteranodons, they were pterodactyls. So these are called the pterygoid plates. And there's one medial and one lateral. Two next to each other on either side. And muscles attached called the medial and lateral pterygoids. They're the muscles that allow you to move your truck side to side and front to back. So there's four muscles, temporalis, masseter, medial and lateral pterygoids that are called the muscles of mastication. We chew with those. They're very powerful. Chewing muscles are pretty tight. We'll get to that with cranial nerves. And then thankfully, the last feature I want to make are those three openings. Foramen rotundum, that's a nerve that innervates for pain your upper jaw. The foramen ovale, it's oval, it innervates the lower jaw for pain and also innervates those chewing muscles. That little guy over here called the foramen spinosum. The foramen spinosum is a little spiny one that's a little that. Aren't you happy you came? It's a lesson. Okay. We'll get to it together. I think it's talk on my worst day. I just got up a minute ago and had slept all night. But we're not done. Don't pack up. We're almost done. It's okay.
That was the awkward pause. I thought that was like.
That's okay. It's okay. We'll make the last part fast. How's that? These are easy. Okay? There's only one that has anatomy in it. That's the jaw. It's the only one that moves. That's what's unique. All those other bones ain't move. Say it in my way. I may speak eloquently now, but understand I can swear with the best. When you have a son who's in the Navy, you learn how to do that. So this is, now again, surely if it's two bones, you consider it as one. Because we're born and we're fused together, we're going to get something. So this is called the body, the part that has your teeth, and the part that's here. Technically, this is called the mental area. I don't know why they named it that. This is the mandibular condyle. It's covered in cartilage. It's the part that allows it. This is that fossa and the temporal bone so you can move your jaw. This is where that temporalis muscle attaches to this choroid process. These, anytime you see a piece of bone that kind of goes up an angle, the term we usually give is ramus or rami, R-A-M-I, plural R-A-M-U-S. So where they meet is the angle of the jaw. So when this comes here, and goes there, this is the angle of the jaw. And we use this. The angle of the jaw is something you palpate if you're going to check somebody's carotid pulse. You're going to start CPR if you want to get this. So these, anytime you have anatomy that protrudes, it's called surface anatomy. That's important because we know where stuff is in relation. Lastly, so for all you people who are like me and hate going to the dentist, okay, there's a little opening on the interior. This is the mandible. The opening, and I'm putting this in here, so for real, it's called the mandibular foramen. So these are surface anatomy like this is important because you can feel it. But the dentist can feel it. So when they give you an injection, Advil, to work on your lower jaw, they don't have to give you one shot. Local anesthesia, which I have a ton of experience with, okay, are all about surface anatomy. If you put the medicine in there, they call it Novocaine, it's called lidocaine, for real. If they put it in here, it'll numb that whole side, and even overlap it. That's what anatomy does, because nerves just don't stop it. So when you have to have like a cavity in your upper area, you've got to do several injections. It's a lot harder. You don't have the luxury of having a convenient nerve that you can block. And blocks it. So that's, all the rest of these are pretty straightforward. Okay. I don't have parole. So it goes faster after this, so we'll do it sort of simultaneously. This is, most of the facial bones are right here. The only one that is not in that little array. No, it's the right one or the left. Yeah, there it is. Go like that. So. Put that brown. Go here. Yeah, okay. I like this old one. Kind of. And we used to have all the pieces to make this like one, so it kind of looks like this. That's that zygomatic arch. So I only have one of these. This is the zygomatic bone. That's part of the orbit here. That's kind of your true cheekbone. So it makes up that orbit. The bone that's here with a little opening, if you're on the interior, is a little off. That's the lacrimal bone. The opening is interior. The nasal bones, which are not part of the orbit, are up here. So when you break your nose, it's the bridge of the nose up here. Those are nasal bones. Everything else here is part of it. So a lot of times when someone has you see it, obviously people fights, but sometimes, auto accidents, it's not an unusual thing for breaking your nose like that. So the nasal bone is not part of the orbit. The zygomatic is, the lacrimal is, and then this largest bone in purple that is the axillary bone. And there are two of them because they don't fuse. You can see they would fuse at the bottom. I'll get to this guy in a second. So what is very interesting about that is sometimes when a baby is born, it's incompletely, it's too far apart. We have a specific name. Most often it is associated with mental impairment, but not exclusively. It's called a cleft palate. You've probably heard the term. Sometimes now cleft palate is invisible. Sometimes you'll see someone with a cleft lip. And often these days, they'll have a really short. If they have a cleft lip, it's because they had a cleft palate. So the lip assures you that there was a cleft palate. Why do we fix those early in infancy? Because twofold. One, that opening potentially, because fluid would be put in there, go into your brain. It creates an extra opening that could produce infections in your brain. Because in your mouth, it's not going to be sterile. The more important reason, when I consider it that way, is that without, if these are not together, the baby can't suck effectively. They can't make a seal for sucking, whether it's a bottle or whatever it is. They can't nourish it, they can't. Very effective. So that's important. The reason I made the comment about it's not, kids are cool, a lot of times they don't know. You see a kid who looks funny, or that's, start using that R word, I don't even want to think about social media. We didn't have that. Take it from me, I used to weigh almost 300 pounds. So, I would have gotten, I got a lot of abuse. Nevertheless, so the one I don't have is that shelf of bone, the vomer. I tried to show you before. Again, when you're, they get better when it's being plastic. The vomer would be here, it's just like a plow shape. And again, at perpendicular plates above, they're sort of set this way. So the vomer's on the bottom, perpendicular plates on top, and your nasal cavity is bigger than you think. And lastly, one bone I didn't show, the two I didn't show you, this is your hard palate. You put your finger in your mouth, you can feel the bony portion of the maxilla. The back part of it are these two kind of L-shaped bones. They are palatine bones, named because they make up the palate. The little bump back here is actually in the organ. So technically, it forms a small, very tiny portion. So the facial bones, palatine, maxillary, lacrimal, and the one I got over here, diaphragmatic, are the four facial bones, all paired bones that make up the organ. The oddball, and I'll never ask you a question about it, this guy, that's that turbinate bone that's here. They consider it a separate bone. To me, it's just part of that increasing the surface area of the nose that allows us to smell it. Now you're almost waiting.
So I'm getting there. Oy! There we are. Okie dokie. So here you have all that. So again, I'll print these pictures for you. Here's the ethmoid. Now they're showing them to you. So you can see the cheekbone or zygomatic, the lacrimal, nasal, that one, that darker blue, maxillary, that's there. Sutural bone's not a big deal. Here are the names of them. The turbinates are also called the inferior nasal concha. Mandible, the angle is important. The body is where the chin is. The coronoid process and the condylar process or condyle goes into that notch. And there's a notch in between the two of those. You'll see that. So here's mandibular notch, mandibular condyle, coronoid process. This is the ramus. This is the angle of the body. Maxillary, only thing, and even though there's anatomy associated with it, and there's a sinus with it. The inferior orbital fissure, like I said, is filled with cartilage. Nothing goes through there. So there's really nothing that you have to worry about anatomically. That's there, and they're just showing it to you. The zygomatic, again, that one that's there. Nasal, bridge of the nose. Lacrimal, part of the orbit, and they have that little fossa, and the bump you feel is the sac that's associated with the tear duct. And that's an opening into your nose. So it's like if you have a cold, a lot of times you'll be tearing up. That's a pathway sometimes for infection. You can go from your nose to your eye. That's one way you can get conjunctivitis. Little kids get conjunctivitis, they have dirty hands and they rub their eyes more often than not. And the palatine are those L-shaped bones. They make up the back of the palate and the vomer. Here's the vomer. Here's the palatine. Here's those conchae bones that you saw before. And I think that is everything. The one bone that we don't have, and I'll show it to you, we talk about it in muscles. This bone is the only bone in your body that doesn't attach to another bone. We have it wired here, so we don't lose it. It's called the hyoid. And muscles attach for your tongue, speaking, for swallowing. So it's a bone that's kind of formed surrounding almost with the full toe muscles that are on them. So there's really not a lot to say about it. Where it's important is forensically, because if somebody is strangling that bone is different. If you ever got forced to kill somebody with strangling, I don't know.
What is it called?
Hyoid, Hyoid.
Oh, like thyroid.
The hyoid. And the thyroid, yeah. And exactly, the thyroid is the gland, your Adam's apple is called the thyroid prominence or eminence. And you can actually, sometimes, depending on how much fleshy your neck is, sometimes you can actually feel it. So it sounds like thyroid. And that's something, and you get to that in AP too. And there it is. That's all you got to know. See you later. Thank you. Thank you. What?
See right here, there's nothing here, right?
Right.
When you touch right here.
Yeah, that's cartilage. I mean, all our nose.
But it's like a bone.
Yeah, the bone is way up here, and those other bones are deep inside. You have a lot of cartilage. Noses are. When you see somebody, in there, it used to happen at Roethlisberger, quarterback field. he get hit in the face, his nose will be sideways, the next week it'll look like it was back.
That's not cartilage.
You can put it back, and a lot of times when people have cosmetic repairs, you can sort of break the cartilage, push it, and they splint it.
You break your nose and break your cartilage.
Yeah, most of the time it's cartilage, but when you're broken nose, technically would have that.
Tomorrow, next week, we're doing.
Pardon me?
Next week, we're going.
We do it next week. We're going to do all the extremity bones, and we're going to do the spine.
Okay.
That's the plan of attack.
Is the spine, is it called the vertebrae?
Vertebrae are the bones of the spine are the vertebrae. The spine is named for what sticks out in the back. There's called spinous process. So you